Yes, guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another live stream. And the transfer window slamming shut this week, Thursday. There's plenty of business to be done still, and Chelsea are probably going to be one of the busiest clubs. I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Jacobs to go through all the latest transfer news. We're going to be bringing you the latest on Aubameyang, Zaha, Gordon, Conor Gallagher, and lots more. Ben, thank you so much for joining me as always, mate. Let's get stuck straight into it then. And Chelsea's pursuit of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Now, the Barcelona forward has been Thomas Tuchel's #1 priority seemingly for a while now. A deal was seemingly pretty close. Fabrizio Romano reporting about 10, 11 days ago that personal terms had been agreed during a meeting in London. But subsequently, David Ornstein reporting today that Chelsea are kind of not so sure on the deal now. And he was saying that personal terms hadn't been agreed. Chelsea having reservations about the fee, his age, etc. as well. What is the latest on Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang? Obviously, Xavi would like to keep him at Barcelona, but I mean, what can we expect in the next few days with this transfer? I mean, is Aubameyang likely to stay? Will Chelsea cough up the cash? Because Barca want 30 million euros. Chelsea obviously not prepared to go above that, go to that price. They want to include Alonso in the deal. Barcelona are adamant that that's going to be a separate transaction if it does happen. I mean, what's going on with this one?
Well, it's just a bit more complicated, and this is late window games, really. But the financials are effectively very close for an Aubameyang deal. It's just a case that there's two options on the table. So option number one, which is Chelsea's preference, is 15 million in cash, and then Alonso. And Barcelona have at the moment called on Alonso. It remains to be seen whether they U-turn on that. And then there's the secondary offer. And Chelsea are not going to take the value of Alonso and just add it to their 15 million because they're trying to push Barcelona to accept the swap deal. So the secondary straight cash deal, which is the more likely at the moment, is a lower number. And Chelsea feel like just shy of 20 million is fair, loosely speaking, but there's gamesmanship to it, because if you're presented with a higher offer and a player versus a lower cash offer, then from Barcelona's perspective, they're being pressured into accepting the swap deal. And then it depends on who moves first. Do Chelsea up the straight cash offer, or do Barcelona take the swap deal? And then, as you say, it all depends on Aubameyang. So this one is in the balance because the player has to decide. And my understanding is that the personal terms have not been agreed, but are not thought to be a problem after a meeting between Aubameyang's representatives and Chelsea around about 10 days ago. And he would be very open to Champions League football and linking up with Thomas Tuchel, but Xavi has said repeatedly that he's part of the plans as well. So Aubameyang is in a great position. Let's wish him well too, because he's not had an easy 24 hours with a horrifying robbery at his home. But that aside, as he looks to assess his future, he's got two good options on the table. He's under no pressure to leave Barcelona, even financially now. And Chelsea are pushing very hard and can offer Champions League football and a manager that he knows very well. So as I reported probably around about a week ago, the actual financials of the deals, plural, are very close. But Barcelona are holding and waiting because they need to decide which of the two, if any, they're actually prepared to accept. So the situation is not about haggling per se. It's about, are Chelsea going to get their way and do a straight cash deal for an amount they think is fair, or get the swap deal, which is their #1 priority? Or are Barcelona going to demand more money, and then will Chelsea have to up that offer late in the window? And there's not much negotiation in terms of structure or numbers. There's almost like two options in place. And then when one needs to be activated, the deal can be completed very quickly. And then the secondary thing is it all hinges on Aubameyang, because he would prefer a 2-year deal with one option to extend. And Chelsea want to offer a 1-year deal, in all likelihood, for the second year that is optional. So that's why the personal terms haven't been agreed. The wages and other aspects of the personal terms are not thought to be a problem. But there's a short way to go on the financial side, but two options, and Barca are stalling until they know what they want to do. And there's still a slightly longer way to go in order to get Aubameyang to be fully sold on the move. My personal view is it's still more likely than unlikely, but this is Barcelona, and every transfer is contingent upon a potential incoming, a space for registration, and their financials. And that's what's made dealing with Barcelona so difficult during this window. But Chelsea are still there. They're at the table. They're obviously exploring other options concurrently at the same time. They have to, because we're so late in the window, but they certainly haven't given up on Aubameyang. And they know that if they get a green light from Aubameyang, which will also put more pressure on Barcelona, they'll then make a decision on whether they're prepared to accept that swap deal, which I still think is less likely, or whether a cash deal is possible. And then the cash deal will obviously just need a small amount of negotiation, but nothing is far away in terms of the nuts and bolts of the transfer. What is far away, but it can't be that far because we're so late in the window, is actually Barcelona making the decision on what they want to do. And then it's all down to Aubameyang from that point onwards.
And in terms of, obviously, are there any chances of Chelsea potentially walking away from this deal? I mean, I've seen several reports saying that potentially today, if nothing can be agreed, Chelsea might be prepared to walk away. I know there's potential doubts as well over age and whatnot. You mentioned the contract and stuff. I'm sure those are things that can be sorted out. But could you envisage a situation potentially with Chelsea just walking away from this deal? I mean, I feel it would be a bit of a shame to do that, considering he's Tuchel's number one priority, and there's a lot of kind of time and effort's gone into this deal. To kind of walk away at the 11th hour, as it were, would be, I don't know, I'm not sure that would be the wisest of ideas. But then Todd Bowley's obviously got a valuation in mind, not prepared to pay a certain amount. But I suppose from a Chelsea perspective as well, not really in the strongest position, because we're desperate for a forward player and time's running out in the window. So if we're desperate, we're going to have to probably pay a little bit more than we might want to. And if Aubameyang is to leave Barcelona, it's very much for Chelsea? I mean, there was another inquiry from Manchester United, but it would very much be Chelsea or stay at Barca, as far as you're aware.
The inquiry for Aubameyang from Manchester United has been briefed and pushed from the Barca end, which tells you that's pressure, again, tactically on Chelsea to be fearful of a rival and potentially up their straight cash offer. And Barcelona are in a great position because they don't mind if they keep Aubameyang, and they don't mind if they lose Aubameyang, as long as it's for the right price. But Manchester United are going to struggle for Aubameyang with Chelsea still in the race, because Aubameyang would either like to stay at Barcelona or move and play under Thomas Tuchel and have Champions League football. And then Manchester United can't offer any of that. And the first thing Aubameyang's going to ask is Ronaldo staying or going, and who else is coming in? And I think that Chelsea have got a bit more stability and a defined focal point for Aubameyang, plus that Champions League football. So I think Manchester United would be very much a distant third if they do advance their interest. And it is still a big if, because a lot of the noise about Aubameyang to Manchester United is coming out of Barcelona rather than out of Old Trafford, as things currently stand. So that's probably the first thing to say. And then the other thing, and it's always a myth in the window, is clubs don't walk away because you never burn your bridge. So at this stage of the window, you are spinning plates and looking for multiple targets. And then if another one becomes viable, you may move on to that, or you may use that as leverage to go back to, in this case, the Aubameyang deal and say, we've got another option, you've got to decide today. So Chelsea, like any club, even though fans get really excited by it, don't want to make late movement in the last 24 hours of the window and have a mad scramble for things like medicals and paperwork and registration. Everyone wants to do their business in timely fashion. So a normal deal under circumstances that aren't in the last week of the window would have a negotiation, finally a deal, whether verbal or otherwise, paperwork, medical, registration, announcement. And even if you did that at super speed, it would take 3 or 4 days. So we're Monday now, the window is Thursday closing, which means that unless you put a deadline of today or tomorrow, you are going to be in a mad scramble. So I don't think it's a case of pressuring. I think it's just normal at this stage of the window to have to make decisions. And that applies to both a buyer and a seller. But Chelsea will never walk away. They'll explore multiple targets. They'll line up multiple options because they desperately need to bring in either an attacker or a creative-minded option. And then they'll have their rankings as to what is possible, if only one is possible. And they'll use one possible deal as leverage against another. But there's never usually a burning of the bridge or a complete walk away. even earlier in the window, because you may need to return at some point. You may have a U-turn, and the last thing you want to do is, in inverted commas, walk away, because it doesn't send the best message to the player. And I actually think with Chelsea, that was the challenge with Jules Koundé, regardless of the saga, regardless of the fact that Monchi said he was sold, in inverted commas, to Chelsea. And then there was that unexpected twist where he'd rejoined up with the team for pre-season. But if you're Jules Koundé, what did you hear during that whole saga? You heard Chelsea wanted him historically and they couldn't complete the deal. Chelsea wanted him at the beginning of the window and they couldn't complete the deal. Chelsea turned to several other targets. Then they came back to Jules Koundé. And then obviously at the same time, Xavi said, you're an elite level centre-back. You're integral to my plans. Hold on, we'll get you. So one club pitched to the player with clarity and the other pitched to the player with uncertainty, because they wanted him, they didn't want him, they made a bid, they didn't make a bid, they agreed terms, they didn't get the deal done for a variety of different reasons. And now we hear, which is partially PR, that Thomas Tuchel always had concerns potentially about the player, which is something you get briefed on after a deal is done. So this is the same with walking away with any player, that if you say you walk away, or if you did actually walk away, if you change your mind, and I'm not specifically talking about Aubameyang, but if you decide to come back in, whether this window late on or another day, another window, the player remembers that. And then if there's a rival, they start to think, how much did the player really want me? And Yuri Tielemans is a good example of this, that Arsenal have waited and waited and waited. And they may still come in, they may not. They may wait until next summer. But Tielemans' perspective was that he would move to Arsenal if Arsenal bid, and he'd already agreed broad personal terms. And it's dragged on for so long that if, say, Liverpool came in late for Tielemans, he might just say, you know what? They've made a last-minute strong pitch. They really want me. Arsenal have, it's unfair to say messed me around, but dragged it on. And the player changed his mind. So you never walk away. It's not sensible. You never burn the bridge. You might cool your interest. You might stop negotiation. Newcastle, James Maddison, another good example of that. They bid twice. It's rejected. But they're never going to say, we're not signing Maddison. And it's exactly the same with Chelsea, that they may tell Barcelona that they are exploring other options to put pressure on them. They may sign somebody else, but at no point will they tell Aubameyang and Barcelona, even with 4 days left of the window, that they're just not interested anymore. Because in the last hour of the window, they may need to come back in with a last-ditch offer.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully Aubameyang does join. But again, we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next few days. But Ben, moving on to other attackers now that Chelsea have been strongly linked with. Anthony Gordon at Everton, one that's taken a lot of people by surprise. I certainly myself wasn't expecting Chelsea to be interested in Gordon at all. Wasn't really expecting any big teams to be interested in Gordon. Very limited Premier League experience, 50-odd games, local lad at Everton. But Chelsea seemed strong interest. I mean, 2 bids have already gone in and been rejected, about 40 and 45 million pounds. And then reported maybe a week or so ago that Chelsea were prepared to go in for 60 million pounds, 50 million plus 10 in add-ons. But David Ornstein reporting this morning that a deal seems unlikely, with the clubs a long way apart in their valuation of the player. Frank Lampard saying that he wants him to stay. He thinks he's worth 100 million pounds. I mean, he would say that if he wants him to stay. But I mean, what's going on with Anthony Gordon? I mean, is Chelsea going to be priced out of a move here, or what's the latest on this one?
It's very possible, and I think that Everton are not as open as has been reported to some kind of swap deal. And the reason for that is because the players that they like at the moment are Conor Gallagher and Amanda Broja, and none of them are likely to be available on a loan with an option to buy or a permanent deal. Chelsea still think that Broja can turn into an elite level forward and would like to offer him a new contract. And Broja, having now spoken to Thomas Tuchel, comparative to when West Ham made an offer for a permanent deal, is not as intent to force his way out the club. And Chelsea would still like to hang on to Conor Gallagher as well. So therefore, I think Everton's perspective will be that they want the above market valuation for Gordon, plus on top of that, if they are to explore any Chelsea players, separate discussions for the ones I've mentioned anyway, are far more likely to be straight loan options. And therefore, Chelsea can't really use those players as leverage. It's the same as the Cucurella deal. It was a straight cash deal, and Levi Colwill was not really a sweetener. Now, what you can do is when you get a young player that doesn't really have a preference over a loan deal, you can push them in a certain direction. So you could argue indirectly a straight loan deal can be a sweetener, because you can say to Everton, we'll do everything in our power to get you a loan, but it is entirely separate. So then you come back to looking at Gordon, and Chelsea may have to pay 55 or 60 million. And I know everyone's really excited and some are also baffled by that valuation, but this is the power that Everton have with Richarlison at Spurs and Dominic Calvert-Lewin injured and Gordon playing regularly and still being young and a prodigious talent for the future. So his head has been turned by the Chelsea move, but David Ornstein is absolutely right. As usual, tremendous journalist. The club valuations are different, and everyone is saying Chelsea are going to pay 60 million. I haven't spoken to a single Chelsea source yet that has said they will pay a transfer fee of 60 million pounds. The overall valuation could come to 60 million, but again, structure is more important than number. So is it going to be 60 million? Or actually is Chelsea's line of thinking that it's going to be 40 to 45 million guaranteed, and then a range of different add-ons totaling up to X? And X might be 60 million because Chelsea are trying to test Everton's not for sale stance. But how likely are the add-ons? What's the structure? And people, I think, again, just like to look at a number and say that's extortionate. Or if you flip it and you want Anthony Gordon, you say, why on earth are they not accepting 60 million? It's 20 odd million above his market value. But how likely are the add-ons? Are some of those add-ons contingent upon numbers of games that he plays imminently? Does he have to reach 100 games for Chelsea? And then are there team-related add-ons like Chelsea winning a Premier League or the Champions League in the short term that are just not that attainable? So the clubs are a long way apart in valuation, not just over number, but structure as well. So if this one is to happen, then Chelsea are going to have to move very fast and change a lot in how they're thinking this deal takes place. And then it comes back to the question that you raised when you were asking me about him is it worth it? So with Fofana, they thought it was worth it to give a hugely preferable structure towards Leicester to get a top priority over the line. With Anthony Gordon, they could let him play for a window or a season at Everton and then revisit. And that's the beauty really of entering, that it can sometimes just be tactical. When you come in now, you get player buy-in. And then you say to the player, well, okay, wait for us. And then we'll take you in a year's time when we've seen you play more Premier League football and your value has maybe dropped a little bit. Or if it hasn't dropped, because if he does well at Everton, it could go in the other direction. It's worth paying because you've got more proven Premier League experience. So I would agree with David that this one at the moment is looking unlikely.
Now, would you expect Chelsea to go in with another bid before the window closes? And I know Frank Lampard's been saying that there's got to be a cut-off point for this deal at some point. Everton have obviously signed Neil Maupay as well. Some people might say, oh, they're potentially spending some of that Gordon money. Who knows? But I mean, would you expect Chelsea to go back in with another bid then? Or do you think it's very much kind of a waiting game and a bit of tactics and we just kind of see what happens?
Well, bids are not black and white at this stage of the window because you haven't really got the time to prepare a formal bid or use too many intermediaries. So you tend to have verbal conversations and go back and forwards on numbers. And that's been ongoing between Chelsea and Everton. They've not really lost any significant contact over the course of the last few days or weeks. So it's really just a sense late in the window as to whether Everton's resolve is going to be tested. Frank Lampard has been speaking quite bullishly, and Chelsea therefore might try their luck going back in verbally late on and seeing whether a late bid with a preferable structure does the trick, or Everton, based on their other potential incomings, are more open all of a sudden to letting Gordon go. And this, again, is just the part of the window that's out of your control, that if it needs Everton to bring in one or two and then their stance has changed, then Chelsea have to wait and see. So I think that they're not going to just cease all contact with Everton, but I genuinely believe at the moment that there are higher ranked priorities that Chelsea are looking to get over the line between now and when the window closes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, from my perspective, I just think for someone of Gordon's quality, I think it's way too much money to be spending. Yes, he's got 3 years left on a contract, but I think relatively unproven. And when you've got someone on the books already, and Callum Hudson-Odoi is obviously moving on loan to Bayer Leverkusen, that is similar profile to Gordon and is as good, if not better, who can't get any minutes. I even find from Anthony Gordon's perspective, it a bit of a bit of a strange move for him at this stage in his career. I think he could benefit from staying at Everton for another couple of seasons, play week in, week out, develop his game, and he's still young enough to get a move to a big club in a few years' time. So yeah, for me, it just didn't make. I've loved Chelsea's business in the window so far, but this has been the first one where I've just been like, I really don't understand it. And for the money being spent, you'd expect him to be featuring in the first team quite regularly, and I just can't see where he fits in. I mean, talk of him playing at right wing back, never played there before. It's an expensive to have right wing back cover at 60 million potentially. And then he might not play that much in the front three. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I'm against the deal, but for the money involved, I think Chelsea would be better off trying to bring someone else in or putting that money towards bringing in a midfield player at some point in the future. But another one that's kind of come out of the woodwork again, Wilfried Zaha. Apparently, potentially Chelsea have had contact with his agent or his entourage, Zaha, declaring that he's for sale potentially. A year left on the contract. He would be keen for the move. How likely is this to happen then? What's the latest on Wilfried Zaha's future? Because a year left on the contract. Obviously, Crystal Palace don't want to sell, but they're not really in a position to demand a big transfer fee. I mean, could you see Chelsea moving in the next few days for that?
I think Zaha to Chelsea and even Arsenal are tracking him late in the window would make a lot of sense. A very attainable signing because, as you say, there is player buy-in. The challenge is still in persuading Crystal Palace to sell, but the contract situation might mean that they can be persuaded to do so. And I think that Zaha would actually fit very well indeed into Chelsea's system. He's one of those players that is almost underrated simply because he hasn't been seen in a Chelsea or Arsenal style side. But if you look at what he's done for Crystal Palace and the fact that he's only 29, I think that there's a lot to like, really. I mean, let's not forget this season he's played 3, scored 3. Last season he scored 14 goals. The previous season he scored 11 goals. And he had a very good 2018, 2019 as well, where I believe he scored 10 times in the Premier League. So I think that Zaha has a real eye for goal, is very instinctive, is very clinical, can be reasonably versatile. The age isn't perfect, but if you take him in the same breath and strategy as Aubameyang, he's still 4 years younger and can just give Chelsea that extra dimension. And if Ziyech ends up getting his move to Ajax or elsewhere, and Callum Hudson-Odoi, who you've already mentioned, even though he's not been integral or playing at all, goes as well. And if in the long term, Christian Pulisic is to depart as well, I don't think that he'll go this window. You start thinking Zaha, and even in the course of other windows, Zaha plus a more out and out kind of holding striker might be exactly what Chelsea needs. So the challenge is really going to be persuading Crystal Palace to sell, but it's absolutely clear that Zaha would accept a move to Chelsea, and you can understand why they are considering a late bid. As I understand it at the moment, it is a sort of revival in interest, if you like. So Chelsea looked at Zaha maybe 3 weeks ago, and he was certainly on a very long list when they were considering that they would lose Werner, Ziyech, and potentially be open to offers to Christian Pulisic as well. And that was when the name first materialized, but very much a this summer kind of name. Then they went on to other targets, and now late in the window, they're seemingly coming back again. And I think that number 9s are a premium, really. And the idea of Zaha would be that the price, perhaps, when Chelsea first saw what he was doing, let's say a year back, even though there was no serious move or consideration, was sky high. Now the price for Zaha is going to be lower. And then the question is what? Because we're seeing a variety of players with a year left on their contract, and people are still asking for 35, 40, 45 million. I'm thinking of Tielemans, I'm thinking of Gabriel Jesus's and Sterling's and so on, that they all had contracts that were running down, and still they were at least £40 million players. So that's a consideration as well. But I think what Thomas Tuchel likes about Zaha is that he has that pace and that versatility. He's got good movement off the ball, and he gets into double figures. So he really does make a lot of sense in the system, because Tuchel doesn't want that front third to kind of slow things down too much. And that's what I really like about Zaha. He's got speed of movement and he's got speed of thought. So it's certainly one to watch. There's been no bid placed yet. Palace are still holding out. Zaha is scoring goals. It's not a Fofana situation. You can't really do it this late in the window where he can force too much. So when you add all of that up, it's still a tricky negotiation. But Chelsea are seemingly lining up Zaha. And this is normal, as I said before, because you can't put all your eggs in the Aubameyang basket. Ronaldo, there's a vague possibility. Wouldn't remotely surprise me if Mendes goes back to Chelsea, but that doesn't mean that Thomas Tuchel's position has changed. So then you bring in Zaha and he'll probably divide the fan base. Some will think it's underwhelming and unambitious, and others maybe are more on my side of the coin and they believe that he's actually a pretty perfect fit into the system and the team. So not a marquee signing necessarily, but one of those that just might be the difference between Chelsea finding their cutting edge and not. And that's what they need. Sterling has come in, for me, marquee signing. There's been a range of outgoings. There's a few players that haven't really found their confidence in front of goal. And then there's those peripheral players that have got big reputations, but for whatever reason, either aren't getting the game time because they're too young. Conor Gallagher is one example who can be a goal scorer. Armando Broja is the other one. And then you've got the sort of Pulisic who should be able to contribute, but have lost a bit of form, at least at domestic level. And that's where Zaha comes in. You think red hot at the moment, very confident, used to Premier League pace, would probably hit the ground running at Chelsea. And it might just be one of those unsung, to some extent, cogs or players that makes all the difference between Chelsea that have to kind of go to a Goodison Park and hang on, or a Chelsea that play Leicester and miss a few chances versus a Chelsea that get that 1-0 to a 2-0, and then they've got the game management and the depth and the quality to see games out a bit more comfortably.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, I'm fully on board with this Zaha deal. I think it makes sense, as you say, younger than Aubameyang. I mean, I wouldn't mind both of them. I mean, Ben, could both be a possibility, or would you expect it to be one or the other?
I think
out of Aubameyang and Zaha, because I think both could be possible. I think both would make sense as well.
A lot's just going to depend on the financials and who else Chelsea potentially move for in the market. I don't think, for example, if they are to proceed with Gordon, that then you would have possibility of Zaha and Aubameyang. But what we know from Gordon is that there's plenty of budget left this window that Chelsea are prepared to spend. So who's to say that they won't bring in two? The original plan at the beginning of the window was a Sterling +1, and that one was a more creative-minded player, which is obviously why they went for Rafinha. Aubameyang's a slightly different kind of player. So it is possible that they complement each other, but you've also got to think about the players themselves. So the more you bring in, and whoever came first of those two, the other player would obviously be asking about what their role is and where they're going to fit in. So would some of the existing Chelsea players as well. So Ziyech is probably going to depart. So I suppose that clears one spot, but it's not definite that yet. But I think a lot of people feel like Anthony going to Manchester United is going to help his cause in trying to get back to Ajax. But let's wait and see. Callum Hudson-Odoi going, but was never really in contention to take a spot. But if you have Zaha and Pulisic and then Gallagher stays at the club, I know it's a slightly different position, but I'm just talking about general space within the team, especially around game management, because Gallagher's more a player, I think, that's going to come on than start that regularly, and then Broja as well. And then if Aubameyang comes too, all of these attack-minded players are going to be asking the same question late in the window, especially if some of them are potential outgoings about where their fit is. And all the incomings are going to be saying exactly the same thing too. And it's the same for Aubameyang if Manchester United do advance their interest. The first question he's going to say is, well, if you want me, fine, but am I replacing Cristiano Ronaldo? Am I playing with Cristiano Ronaldo? What happens when everyone's fit? Then where's my role? Is Rashford going or staying? Is the PSG interest genuine? And these are the late conversations now that are going to be asked. So I think they'll be looking at one to begin with. And then if they feel that two is worth it and Tuchel gives that his blessing, the good thing from Chelsea's perspective is that there's plenty of budget still there because they are prepared to spend big this window.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping for both, but as long as we get at least one, then that's the most important thing. But I just wanted to touch on one other attacker before moving on, Ben. Rafael Leao at AC Milan. Um, Obviously, reported interest from Chelsea. He's obviously got a big release clause in his contract. I think well over 100 million euros for this. Well, just in general, he's out of contract in 2024. So a move next summer would probably make more sense with 1 year left on his contract. How genuine is the Chelsea interest? And I presume that any move for him to come this summer is almost totally out of the question.
It's going to be really difficult. I know that a lot of excitement has gathered, and Chelsea have certainly inquired, but they've been told effectively that Milan want the release clause or nothing. And Leao might even be offered a new contract. The difficulty is going to be in matching the kind of offers that he knows he could get from a Premier League club. And Milan's finances are not brilliant, but I think it's going to be really difficult, potentially even impossible, to get anything over the line now before the window shuts. But that doesn't mean that Chelsea are not just putting their interest out there. And this again is tactical and forward planning and strategic, because if you know that Milan want him to sign a new deal, and you also know as soon as the window slams shut that they want to put that new deal on the table, then you also know that that deal could come with a brand new release clause and the overall asking price will be even higher. So what do you do if you're Chelsea or any other suitor? You go now and make a big song and dance about trying to get him, even though you know it's a probable lost cause in the short term. And then the player's head is turned and he knows what you're prepared to pay him in all likelihood. So then when Milan put down a contract renewal, he says, well, no, there's plenty of interest. You can't match the probable wages that I would receive at a club like Chelsea. And that's tactical, because then if Chelsea come back in January or the summer, they've set the foundations. And much like when I bang on like a broken record about structure being as important as a number, I also constantly bang on about clubs work multiple windows ahead. So just because Chelsea are making an approach about Leao now doesn't mean they can get him now, and doesn't even mean that they want him now. But sometimes tactically you have to inquire, because getting a big name like that takes forward planning. And the last thing that Chelsea would want is to not enter the race now with a view to a future window and then find that he signs a new deal at Milan and then either goes off the table, or if they want him, the release clause or the overall fee becomes sky high. So effectively, he's priced out of the market. So Leao's pretty happy on the field at Milan, but I think he would be open to another move and a challenge for the right financials. And if it benefits Milan, because Milan might be the defending Serie A champions, but their financials are not in brilliant shape. So if the release clause was bid, it might be a different story. So it's one to watch for sure, but I don't really think Leao's that distracted by all of this. I don't really think that Chelsea in any way advanced or confident or even think that a deal is going to be possible. And it would take something hugely unexpected and a massive, massive offer to change that in the short term, but one to watch in the long term, because Chelsea's interest is genuine. But I personally, anyway, don't think anything will be possible in the next 4 days.
Yeah, I guess there's also the small issue of the money potentially owed to Sporting Lisbon as well. Can't remember quite how much that is, but that would have to be obviously dealt with as well.
5 million.
Yeah. So that would have to be incorporated as well. But yeah, I'd probably say, more likely to be, as you say, Ben, probably one for the future, just putting the wheels in motion for a couple of windows' time. But one player who is definitely coming in, and a bit of a unfortunate one for yourself, Ben, is that Wesley Fofana has finally agreed to join Chelsea. It's all done and dusted. Fee was agreed on Friday. It was going to be £70 million going up to 75 with the add-on. So under that world record fee, which Chelsea were really key to make sure it was. He's going to sign a 6-year contract. When can we expect an official announcement? Reports coming out this morning that he's gone to the US for his medical. I mean, what's the reasons behind him going out to the States to do his medical rather than in London?
Well, I think this is just precaution from Chelsea's point of view. And medical takes place in 2 parts. And if a player has a history of injuries, the buying club may prefer to send him to a specialist, and the resources available in America from Todd Bowley's perspective and under the Dodger family and around certain world-renowned specialists mean that America medical is just more sensible. And Chelsea want to make every step as thorough as possible before paying this amount of money. And part of that is because, again, the structure of the deal was more important than the number, and Leicester are getting a huge chunk up front, and it's very rare to pay so much money to Leicester City or any club within the space of a year. And that's how they've got the player at 70 million rather than 85 million. Leicester will feel that it's a great deal for them. But Chelsea need to make sure, because they're giving a player a long-term contract who's had a history of injuries and the transfer fee is all being paid in one chunk, that they do their due diligence. And that requires sending Fofana to a specialist and doing the medical in America where there's more resources. Cobham and any medical that would normally take place on a football club's campus, if you like, is one thing. And parts of the medical can be done there by Chelsea's medical staff. And Chelsea's medical staff may well be flying out to America as well to be part of this too. But when you have a player that has recovered from some serious injuries, that due diligence is necessary. And not just to make sure that this is the right price and the right deal, because there's no significant danger of Fofana failing the medical. But it's also just to be aware that when they, for example, insure him medically, when they provide a what if X happens, like your career ends early, and other aspects that are more specific to the player than necessarily the deal between Leicester and Chelsea, all of those boxes are ticked as well. So it's actually about a protection to the football club as well, which is quite sensible, because the last thing they want to do is pay this amount of money, put clauses in the contract around what if your career ends early? What do we pay you? What if you pick up another injury? Does the wage drop if it's long term and you're still on our books, and so on? And if they've not done their due diligence, then you can run into problems with things like insurers, because the football club, if the career ends early, are not just reaching into their pocket. It's all covered and it's all insured. But in order to get all of those box ticks and ensure that the deal is fully completed with Leicester, you just want to make sure that the experts are across the medical, as well as the excellent medical staff at Chelsea Football Club. And that's the logic of sending him to America.
And in terms of kind of an official announcement, I suppose, in the next few days, I guess, and we could potentially see Fofana make his debut at home to West Ham at the weekend, would you say?
We first have to just see how quickly the deal is completed, but that's highly likely, obviously. It's just perfect across the back three, isn't it, for Chelsea to have Koulibaly back from suspension, and then in addition to that, Silva and Fofana as your kind of three automatics. I'm talking generally now across the season rather than specific to any suspensions or injuries and so on. But that's the three, I think, that you pick when everybody's fit. Yeah. And then you've got Chilwell or Cucurella, and then on the other side, Reece James. And I'm really excited actually to see the relationship between, even though this sounds really strange, Koulibaly and Fofana and James, even though I think most people will talk about him learning from Silva, who's alongside him. And the reason I say Koulibaly is because later in his career, Koulibaly has made a real effort to enhance his attacking game. And on the training field, I think it'd be really interesting to see how Fofana develops and learns from Koulibaly specific to that point of how can you be more offensive? Because he's a complete defender. He's got a lot of great qualities. But one of the things I think that he didn't do as well at Leicester was progressively pass and move the ball quickly, speed of movement, speed of thought when he was on the ball. He didn't really need to at Leicester. But at Chelsea, he's going to have a lot more time. He's going to be able to move a lot further up the field comparative to in a back four at Leicester. So then he's got time to pick a pass. He's got time to be a bit more incisive. And we saw that, say, with Koulibaly, with the pass that led to the penalty at Goodison Park. The volley, of course, was excellent as well. But the pass that won the penalty, or led to it anyway, was classic because it was incisive. It showed speed of thought. It was progressive. That's where Fofana can develop. And I think that Koulibaly is a good role model to help him with that. Silva for leadership. Both of those players, I think, just to get him away from this saga of petty social media. Because obviously Chelsea have to be conscious of that you've now got your dream move. You're at an elite club. So he should just be delighted and stable and focus on his football. But there is still that nagging doubt at Chelsea's end of what if in 3 years PSG come calling? What if he isn't in the side? And I just think that those senior players at the football club can turn him into a more level-headed individual off the football field that will end up benefiting his football as well. And then Reece James is just going to be an interesting dynamic and relationship to see how they feed off each other. And again, I come back to that. Composure on the ball is generally there. That defensive qualities, winning aerial duels, positional senses. At times he's even nonchalant in how he tackles and gets interceptions, and he conserves energy and has got good acceleration over short spaces. So all of that bodes very well. And of course, he can play in a back three or a back four if Tuchel chooses to use a back four at any point. And then it's developing those fine margins. Nothing's bad about Fofana, but when you're trying to go from being an amazing centre-back to a world-class centre-back, you've got to add that speed of thought. You've got to add that progressive passing. You've got to have that selflessness at times, and you've got to be able to maybe add a little bit more of an offensive element to your game. And I think that's where, when I look across that Chelsea back line, there's so many players that he can learn from, which is why I think it's such an exciting move. And probably the last thing I would say is just, you've got to give credit to the new ownership group. And the reason for that is because they've gone against the strategy of really the old regime. And the reason why I say that is because Marina and co. did not think Fofana was available this window, period. And that was the advice. And that's not a criticism. That's the reality of what most major football clubs thought about Wesley Fofana. And many even thought that even at 80 million, 85 million, he wouldn't be available at the beginning of the summer. So when people talk about Fofana in the late bid, it's not a case of Chelsea going to Fofana. Fofana was always a top priority. So then why did they try for Delete, for Ake? They obviously got Koulibaly, Skriniar, Dumfries, and so on. I don't think I can even remember all of the targets. There's been that many. Why did Fofana come so late in the chronology? And the answer is because the genuine feeling was that he was not for sale and it wasn't even worth it. And that was the belief of the old regime. And of course, if they had briefed the new regime, and they're still at the football club to do that, early in the window, even if it would have been bad advice that Fofana might be available, that his head might be turned by Chelsea, they'd have got this deal done a lot earlier and we wouldn't have had this saga. And perversely, it would have benefited Leicester because they would have had far more funds and freedom to move in the market. Now, that's not a criticism, to be clear, of the old regime. It's just the reality. So then what changed? Well, ultimately, Todd Boehly said, because Thomas Tuchel liked Fofana and other targets were not hit, let's just try it. It might be a lost cause, but what's the harm in trying? And at that point, it triggered Fofana to very publicly force his way out of the football club. And it became a deal that now has got over the line. And I think you have to give a lot of credit to the new ownership group, because even if they were foolish, even if it looked like wasted time, even if there was a slim percentage when they first came to the table of it happening, they didn't just sit there as new owners and say, well, we're told it's probably not possible, so we'll continue to fight for other targets. They said, you know what? This is the right fit. A right-sided centre-back that is perfect for what we need now. So let's just go in and see whether we can change Leicester's mind for the right number. And Fofana helped with that as well. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for that, because this isn't a last-minute move. He was always a target. They just didn't think that it was possible earlier in the window. And now, as we've seen, it has been possible this window. So all credit to them, really, with a bit of help from Fofana and a lot of money for getting the deal over the line.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to see him in a Chelsea shirt. And I'm delighted that we've managed to get this deal done as well. But I just wanted to quickly round out with some outgoings very quickly. But first things first, guys, keep smashing the likes on the stream and please subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't done so already. We'd really appreciate that. I just want to start with Conor Gallagher. Obviously, Chelsea boy, not had the best start to his Chelsea career, coming back from loan at Crystal Palace. Not great against Leeds, like everyone else, was poor as well. Got a big opportunity against Leicester at the weekend. Picked up a red card, a little bit over-eager in my opinion, too keen to impress and whatnot. Crystal Palace supposedly have bid around £27 million for him. That's obviously going to be immediately rejected. Tuchel likes Conor Gallagher. The board and the owners want to keep him. But Gallagher's obviously going to want to play regularly for Chelsea. He's going to want to try and go to the World Cup squad with England. And I don't think he's going to get too many opportunities at Chelsea. Obviously, with Kante and Kovacic injured and stuff, there are perhaps a few more opportunities there. But, I mean, what is the latest on Conor Gallagher? Can you see Chelsea letting him go? I mean, would a loan deal potentially suit all parties involved? And I mean, I've seen some of Phillips reporting that he says that someone had told him that if Gallagher were to leave, whether it be permanently on loan, Crystal Palace would be the club that he would go to. What are you hearing on the latest with Conor Gallagher? Do you expect him to stay at Chelsea?
Well, I think he'll stay at Chelsea in the sense they're not open to a permanent sale. Yeah. And Crystal Palace have made a £27 million offer, and I don't even think the valuation is anywhere close to what Chelsea would accept either. So that's the challenge, that Palace love Gallagher, but are they prepared to have another loan with no ability to buy? And unless Gallagher goes to Chelsea and says, listen, I think my future's done here, which would be a very strange thing to say, given that he started the last game and he has had opportunities this season, but there aren't that many spots in that midfield. And he doesn't know what Chelsea are going to do with other midfielders over the course of the next 3 windows, this one, January, and next summer. So he's obviously seeing Frankie de Jong, and then Jorginho has kind of got a second wind and is delighted now Koulibaly's arrived. So that is a bit problematic for Gallagher because of how the system is used. His opportunities may be few and far between. And Palace would love Gallagher. But again, as things stand, unless Gallagher forces his way out the football club, Chelsea are not open to a permanent sale. And then you've got other options for Gallagher, like Everton, who might be prepared just to take a straight loan deal. Frank Lampard really likes the player. I don't see that being factored into any Anthony Gordon deal because, again, it would be a loan, not a loan with an option to buy. And as far as Chelsea are concerned, unless the player says he wants to leave, it will not be a permanent exit. And that's the challenge for Crystal Palace, that 1, they've not met Chelsea's valuation, I don't think anyway, and 2, Chelsea don't want to sell the player. So Gallagher's 50-50 as to whether there will be an outgoing between now and the end of the window. With the outgoings, the most interesting one is still Marcus Alonso, because if Chelsea get their way, he'll go to Barcelona and they'll get him off the books, and Alonso wants the move and Chelsea will get Aubameyang. So that is scenario A. And as I said before, it just depends on Barcelona. Have they cooled their interest in him, or is it all games? And are they going to return to the table? And with Alonso, as I've said many times, Barcelona will put out conflicting messages intentionally. So if they want the cash for Aubameyang, they'll say they've called on Alonso, and then they might get the cash for Aubameyang and then still come in for Alonso as a separate deal. Or they might do the swap deal, which I sort of hope happens, because Bowley's desperate for a swap deal for the entire window and he hasn't got one yet. I suppose technically you could argue Colwell Cucurella is almost a swap deal, but they're really separate deals because Colwell's coming back to Chelsea and Cucurella is a permanent signing. So it's 2 deals done by the same clubs but separate. So out of pure sentiment, because he's tried and tried and tried, starting with Lukaku and a ton of Inter players being linked, I kind of hope Bowley just pulls off a swap deal. And I don't think that's impossible, by the way, because Chelsea have held firm. They've got that deal very close in terms of the financials, but Barca are waiting to decide whether they're prepared to do business. So Alonso's another outgoing still to watch. I'm not 100% that it will happen, but I still think that from Chelsea's point of view, they want him out of the football club. And then obviously we know about Callum Hudson-Odoi as well. So they're going to have got most of the outgoings that they want. And they're going to have hang on to Broja and probably Gallagher as well. And then obviously the only outgoings that won't have happened that were considered at the beginning of the window will be around those midfielders. And Juve had an interest in Jorginho, but Chelsea want to keep Jorginho now. Kante's injured. I don't see a late outgoing for him taking place. And I still think he's got a short-term role to play at the football club. The desire to get Kante out of the football club was nothing really to do with him per se as a footballer, as just the earnings and how high he is on the wage bill. And that's why they would prefer him out in the long term. But everyone loves Kante. Fans still love Kante, still has a role to play. I think his injury will just stop anything happening unexpected. And Ziyech's obviously the other one. And he would still like that move back to Ajax.
I mean, just last two things very quickly, Ben. You touched on Hakim Ziyech. Obviously, Anthony on his way to Manchester United, best part of 100 million euros. Ajax keen to take Hakim Ziyech. I mean, it was reported initially on loan, but I think they've got money now. Chelsea wanting about, I think, 44 million euros, so around 35, 36 million pounds, pretty much similar to what they paid Ajax. Chelsea know that Ajax have got money. What's the latest on this? Because we know that Ziyech flew to Amsterdam after the Leeds game for a meeting with Ajax. How close is this to happening?
Well, Ziyech wants to move. The fee is obviously going to be one aspect, like you say, but it can't hurt his chances once Anthony ends up as a Manchester United player. And then the question is just going to be in what direction Ajax choose to move. Ziyech wants that return and is prepared to do almost everything possible on the personal side to make the move happen. But it's whether Ajax actually decide that they are going to pay the fee. And in addition to that, the age is a factor. Because once you've got rid of Anthony and you've got that amount of money, how many options become available on the market at younger ages? So Ziyech wants that move, but he's turning 30 soon. And I still, from what I understand anyway, think that Chelsea would want at least 35 million, if not potentially 40 all in. So that's potentially 50% of the Anthony fee for a 30-year-old player. So I still think there's a bit of work to be done on this one. We all know where Ziyech wants to go. We all know that he's driving the move and he's representing himself. And we all know that meetings have taken place. There will be interest from other clubs as well. But the sticking point at the moment, for now anyway, is the fee that Chelsea are demanding. I am still not, talking to some sources in Ajax, 100% sure that they're that clear cut, that they're that neat in their viewpoint that it is Anthony out, Ziyech in. He's an option. They've held meetings with him, but there's a bit of late window negotiation to go if this deal is to come off. So one to watch for sure. A lot of excitement. We know that Ziyech is confident and he's representing himself. So he knows the situation better than most. There's no agent games in it. But let's see, because as I say, it might be detrimental in many ways, the fact that he's kind of driving the whole move himself, because if Chelsea just turn around and say, this is the price, full stop, and Ajax say that's too high, are they going to run out of time in the window? So one to watch for sure, but, nobody would be surprised if Ziyech isn't a Chelsea player in 4 days' time.
And just the very final one, mate, very quickly. A lot of people in the chat and people on Twitter and stuff getting very excited and a bit carried away, I feel, about Frankie de Jong flying to London. I'm still under the illusion that obviously he wants to stay at Barcelona. Chelsea still hold an interest in him, but it looks very unlikely. Can you just clear those two things up very quickly?
Nothing to read into de Jong's trip to London. That's the first thing. He's travelling over for a wedding. And Donny van de Beek is getting married. Congratulations to him. He's not come to talk to Chelsea. He's not come to complete a move. It's simple social media hype based upon seeing him in London. And London doesn't even mean anything either, because when Chelsea have been negotiating, they've been doing it in Barcelona. London also is a place, by the way, where Manchester United and Liverpool have got offices as well. So if you're going to start false hype and sensationalist headlines, you could argue it many different ways. But my understanding has been pretty consistent. And de Jong's position has been pretty consistent as well. He wants to stay at Barcelona. And if Barcelona do not get Bernardo Silva, they don't need the best part of 80 million and they can keep de Jong. And then the consideration is on what terms. And are they going to pay the defayed wages and then negotiate with him? Or are they going to go straight into salary reductions? And has he U-turned and is he prepared to take a pay cut? Or is he just going to be stubborn and let the window shut and stay on his current wages for now and broach a negotiation at a later point? So the manner in which he stays is unclear, but the most likely scenario at the time of recording, barring something unexpected and barring a raft of Barcelona incomings, including Silva, is that de Jong will stay at Barcelona. If he leaves, and this is the part that people always take out of context, if he leaves, and he would almost have to be forced out, and it would be unexpected and against his desire. if he leaves in the next 4 days, that's when Chelsea are more confident than Manchester United. And I've always said this, that Manchester United had all but given up on De Jong a few weeks back. And I got hammered for it because people were saying that De Jong had said in the dressing room he was joining Manchester United because there were reports in Holland that said that Man United were making a late offensive and that Erik ten Hag would have face-to-face talks. Where's the offensive? Manchester United didn't make an offensive. Ten Hag did not have face-to-face talks with Frenkie de Jong. Nothing has moved as far as Manchester United and de Jong are concerned, and they have all but given up. So a lot of that, I think, was just PR from Manchester United's side because they didn't want to be seen to have given up. And now they can kind of more privately admit that because they've had a good end to the window. Casemiro's arrived, Antony is incoming. So they don't need to be judged on a de Jong saga that hasn't paid off for them. So if he was to leave, I still think Chelsea is a more likely destination than Old Trafford, and the Champions League football aspect will help. But the reality is it's irrelevant what de Jong's hypothetical preference might be if he leaves Barcelona, if his main aim is to stay at Barcelona. And right now, barring Silva arriving and barring a very unexpected twist in the next 4 days, de Jong wants to stay at Barcelona. He said that all window, and that remains the most likely scenario.
No, perfect. Yeah, I think as expected. But yeah, thanks so much for clearing up. That's just a good point to round out. Ben, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate all your insight as always. Guys, make sure you follow Ben on Twitter as well for all the latest transfer news and updates. It's been fantastic across the window with the takeover saga as well, and that was going on. So yeah, please make sure you give him a follow and follow his stuff. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please smash the likes on your way out and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. But yeah, guys, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day and catch you again soon.